Okay. Good morning. We are from Team 4, and we are here today to discuss about how compliance UBAYA student with COVID-19 health protocols. So, why we choose this topic and this title? Well, first, it's because COVID-19 virus that have been a massive problem in Indonesia and around the world. And second, because of the quarantine that we must undergo during the pandemic. And the third one is to help UBAYA carrying out offline class. So the purpose of our poster is to know the adherence of UBAYA students to health protocols and to help UBAYA find out how many of their students have had direct contact with COVID-19 patient. So the possibilities of someone getting infected around UBAYA environment will be smaller. The statistics method we use is cluster sampling. We use UBAYA student as our population, our cluster, and they can fill our questionnaire no matter their condition.
So this is our poster about UBAYA students' level of compliance with health protocols. In 2020, there is COVID-19 virus, which is so dangerous and make all activities carried out online. So how do UBAYA students protect their body from the virus? Do UBAYA students ready to go offline class? We will find out in this diagram. The first diagram, we ask the UBAYA students about how often they leave their house. We can see some different answers from our respondents. Most of them are leave their house 2 until 5 times in a month. And the second diagram, we ask about their understanding to health protocols. And almost all of them are understand about the health protocols. And the third diagram, we ask about do they apply social distancing when they are in public. 67.5% are apply social distancing but not for their friends and their family. And 30% of our respondents are apply social distancing to everyone. And the rest of our respondents are rarely to apply social distancing.
Continue with the fourth diagram. This diagram tells us about what UBAYA students doing outside of their house. Around 61% of our response show us that UBAYA students go out because they need to buy their daily needs. Of course, this stuff is understandable, especially if there are supermarket or traditional market around their living place. But there are ways for them to buy their daily needs from their home. For example, online delivery. The fifth diagram shows us what UBAYA students think that is important to bring outside other than mask. First, around 38.4% of our response says that hand sanitizer is important to bring outside. Second, around 24.7% of our response says that drinking bottle is important to bring outside. Third, around 19.2% of our response says that wet tissue is important to bring outside. Fourth, around 14.1% of our response says that shopping bag is important to bring outside. Fifth, around 3.5% of our response says that there is other stuff that is important to bring outside. For example, mobile phone. Now, we will continue to the sixth diagram. This diagram tells us about where do UBAYA students get the information about health protocol of COVID-19. Around 38.5% of our response says that they get the information from social media. After that, around 27.6% of our response says that they get the information from television news. And then around 23.5% of our response says that YouTube is the source of their information. After that, around 9.6% of our response says that the newspaper and magazine is the source of their information. And last but not least, there is 0.8% of our response says that they get the information from their family and friend. Because you can always trust your family and friend.
Continue on the seventh diagram. From the data of our respondent, among 92.5% never had contact with COVID-19 patient, and the rest, 7.5% had direct contact with COVID-19 patient. So, we can conclude that all of our respondents have never been infected with the COVID-19 virus. In the next diagram, we know that among 86.3% of our respondents are ready to go to offline class by adhere to health protocols, but 13.7% of our respondents, or 11 people out of 18 respondents, are not ready to take offline classes by adhering to the UBAYA health protocols. So that's the end of our presentation about our poster. Now, we will explain some questions that we gave to our respondent but were not explained on the poster. The first question is about how often UBAYA students take off their masks in the public places. 26.3% of our respondents very rarely take off their masks. Around 46.3% of our respondents rarely take off their masks. 18.8% of our respondents sometimes take off their masks. 7.5% of our respondents often take off their masks. And the last one is 1.3% of our respondents very often take off their masks.
The next graphic shows us how often UBAYA students wash their hands when they leave the house. Around 2.5% of our respondents say that they very rarely wash their hands, and around 5% say that they rarely wash their hands. In the graphic show us around 48.8% say that they often wash their hands. That is the most response out of the other response. And then around 26.3% say that they wash their hands very often. And the other 17.5% response say that they sometimes wash their hands when they leave the house. And the next diagram shows us what type of the mask UBAYA students are usually used. Around 8.8% usually use N95 masks. And around 22.5% usually cloth masks. And then around 68.8% say that they usually use medical masks. And this is the type of mask that most widely chosen by our response. That brings us to the end of the presentation. I would like to summarize by saying that 86.3% of our response ready to go to offline class by adhering to healthy protocol. So we hope that offline class will start as soon as possible. Thank you for listening to our presentation. And we hope what we share will be useful information for all of us.